In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Krebs, and this is the OSINT podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the OSINT podcast. This is episode 22, and in today's episode, I'm going to be covering 3 different issues of the OSINT newsletter. We are going to be covering issue number 114, which is titled Reply Guys and Power Users, OSINT on Forums and Online Communities. And then we're going to be moving into issue number 115. It is titled OSINT Tool Tuesday, another issue of OSINT Tool Tuesday, but it's going to be for a tool called Leaker. We're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into that tool. And then finally, we're going to be moving on to OSINT Newsletter Classic, otherwise known as OSINT Newsletter issue number 116. This one is going to be talking about creating an OSINT tool that constantly improves. I'm excited to talk about this, but in addition to the main event on OSINT Newsletter issue number 116, we're also going to be covering the typical OSINT news. I have 2 different articles I want to talk about in this episode, and then 3 different OSINT tools. These are all tools that I found on GitHub, and part of the discovery that went into finding these tools will lead into the main topic, which is creating an OSINT tool that constantly improves. But before we get started, let's do some housekeeping. If you want to do some CTFs that we're putting together for open source intelligence, go ahead and check out ctf.osintnewsletter.com. If you are interested in some of the tools that we were talking about, we actually put them into an entire database that's easy to search and find information in, and you can find that at tools.osintnewsletter.com. We have hundreds of tools at this point. We have very abbreviated guides, and then we take some of those guides of some of the most popular tools and we turn them into OSINT Tool Tuesdays, where we talk a little bit more in depth on how to use the tool, what some of the use cases are, etc. So go ahead and check those 2 sources out. You want to check out the CTFs as well as the tool set. And then finally, this is the typical, but go ahead and head on over to social media. We are on X and LinkedIn primarily, so go ahead and give us a follow there, as well as subscribing to the podcast. And with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so that brings us into issue number 114, where we're going to start. This is a free issue of the OSINT newsletter. If you want to follow along and subscribe if you aren't already, it is osintnewsletter.com/114. The topic of this, again, is going to be called Reply Guys and Power Users, OSINT on Forums and Online Communities. So first and foremost, in typical episodes, I usually give a high-level overview of these. What they're intended to be is beginner guides, intermediate guides for people on specific topics, whether it's phone numbers, email addresses, geolocation, reverse image search, etc. This one, we're going to be talking specifically about forums, and it's not going to be limited to just Reddit. It's a variety of different sources of forums, even something that is forum adjacent, like comment sections of news articles, but we'll talk about that in a second. At a high level, what this article, what this post, this issue covers is what long-term post history means, or what it reveals about a person online, especially when somebody's trying to be anonymous. They're just hiding behind a handle, for example. There's a lot of useful information that you can gather over time to see what people are posting, historically versus what they're posting now. In addition to that, being able to find high-value discussions, because as mentioned on forums, you're typically behind some sort of alias. That's why people often go to Reddit for real answers to questions that they have rather than what they find on the internet, because people that are behind this anonymous veil are typically a little bit more honest. So you're able to find a lot of very interesting things because there's no attribution back to a specific person. And we'll talk about, different tools, tactics, and techniques along the way that you can use for looking into forums and users that are on them, behind aliases, behind different avatars, etc. So from there, we go ahead and start to begin to determine, where are the best sources for gathering information about forums online. We do mention Reddit, but we also talk about niche forums, things like that are very specific to a profession, an interest, a hobby, etc. You could often find a lot of really interesting information on there as well. Oftentimes, these things are not indexed very well on search engines. because sometimes they're held behind some sort of login or something like that. So if you are trying to get into a forum that is behind a paywall, or not a paywall necessarily, but just a login screen, you can get a lot of useful information behind those in certain instances. I think some of them that come to mind are like Nextdoor, for example, but I've also seen very niche stuff like DIY projects, for example, where people will post things that are happening locally in their area. And then lastly, we do mention this article about comment section. I mentioned a little bit earlier in the podcast as well, is that if you see a news article and a news article has comments that are enabled where people can leave comments about a specific post, that's often powered by platforms like Discuss, where you can then follow those users back to their profile and oftentimes get historical information about those individuals as well. So that's where this article sort of starts, is defining the different areas that are useful, defining the certain attributes about forums that are useful, like I mentioned, long-term user history, unfiltered personal discussion, etc. But then we actually step you through a workflow on how to actually find information on forums, get information that you're looking for, identify some of those behavioral patterns, things that are typically going to tell you something about the person without them actually revealing it, in a straightforward manner. So we step through those 4 different items. And so that starts with, searching for a username or a specific topic, discovering the forums that you want to find information in, looking for the specific individuals, being able to use a variety of different tools that are available online to extract historical information about a specific profile. So for example, if you want to be able to pull all the posts from a specific Reddit user, there's a variety of tools that are out there that allow you to sort of extract that information a lot more easily. So you don't have to do it manually, and putting it into a very standard format that could be used by other tools like AI agents, for example, or other enterprise applications that you may have in your workflow. And then from there, we talk about writing style, posting times, interests, things like that. These are things that you can learn about an individual without necessarily knowing their identity. And they could be useful for identifying gender, for example, age, demographics, etc. You could also potentially find location based on time zone or pattern of life. You might find that, they're very active during daylight hours in a specific country, and that country may not be one that you're in, for example. So there's a variety of different things that you can learn about a persona without actually knowing physically who they are. And so that's something that we talk about here in step 3. And then finally, being able to put it all together and, guide an investigation down a certain path using the information gleaned from that. A lot of things we talk about too is sort of fusing this information with other methods that we've discovered. So, username searches on forums, finding information about them, being able to use that aggregation of information to find other profiles, and then be able to do extraction of, images, email addresses, phone numbers, other chronological data that you might be able to find about history or time zone, et cetera, be able to correlate that information together. That's why some of these guides are really useful when you put them all together as a subscriber of the OSINT newsletter, is you're starting to piece together all these individual methods that you can use to get information. And this is one of them, into eventually creating a very holistic investigation that isn't just subjected to a single tool or method or, trail of activity. It's all sort of synthesized into a really cohesive open source intelligence process. So that's it for this one. Go ahead and check it out at osintnewsletter.com/114. In addition to that, we do have a CTF that's posted there as well. If you didn't compete with it or compete for it whenever we publish back July 16th, 2026, it should still be available for you to give it a try. And that's something generally good about the CTFs that we're putting together now, is that you can go back and try them. We do have sort of hints and things like that we publish in later issues for people that have attempted to do the capture the flag but have failed to do so. But you can obviously zoom past that if you don't want any spoilers that are involved in the CTF. So that's it for this one. We'll go ahead and move on to issue number 115 next, which is OSINT Tool Tuesday. And we're going to be talking about a tool called Leaker. All right, so if you want to follow along to this OSINT Tool Tuesday, go ahead and head on over to osintnewsletter.com/115. Again, the tool that we're going to be covering is going to be called Leaker. And Leaker is sort of like a leak discovery tool that returns things like credentials, username, password, IP addresses, a variety of other information that might be associated with the data leak. And the reason why it's great is that it's open source, it's on GitHub. It combines 13 different sources, and it allows you to search not only for emails, which is pretty common, but usernames, domains, keywords, which I think is pretty rare, especially for some of the tools that you've seen. They're usually very restricted to a specific identifier type, like phone numbers. This one also mentions that it can cover phone numbers. And here's some of the things that it queries into. And a lot of them require an API key, so just keep that in mind, that you may need to pay for some of these sources, but the aggregation of all of them together is pretty great. First one is breach directory. Dehashed is the next one, which is pretty common, and a lot of people know about Dehash. Hudson Rock is also another one that you can actually check out for free. They have a free version of their API, but there's also a paid version you can upgrade. I won't go through all of them, but here's some of the highlights. Intelligence X is on there, for example. You have Snuspace, which I think is dormant, but has an existing archive, and a few others like OSINT Leak or LeakSite, White Intel, etc. So it is an aggregator, but the cool part about it is similar to how Spiderfoot used to work way back in the day. Sometimes having an aggregation of multiple sources in a single pane of glass is much better than pivoting from multiple tools altogether. Many of these tools often have similar information because they're pulling from specific leaks that they all have in common. So the deduplication of being able to see them all in one pane of glass is also helpful. So if you see like a matching email address to password, email address to username or first name, etc., and they're identical and they're coming from multiple sources, you may be able to determine that that's coming from the same leak if it doesn't actually specify the leak that it came with along the way. And so that's at a high level what the issue is. Issue number, or what the tool is. The issue 115 kind of steps through the leak or tool and takes you through setup. It shows you how to actually install it, run it, use it. It goes a little bit further than what the wiki provides on GitHub because we actually went and tested out the tools. It includes a variety of different screenshots from username searches, domain names, domain searches, phone number searches, keywords, etc., which gives you a few ideas of what you can find instead of just what it promises to do in the wiki. And then it talks about iterating across multiple different searches. This is a really cool feature about it is you can actually do it across multiple targets by feeding it a TXT file, and it has, let's say, a whole list of email addresses. You can run all of them instead of querying them once at a time. And another thing too is we talk about how you can select sources. Like I mentioned, there's 13 different breach directories, if you will, that it pulls from. You are able to actually select the sources using this tool. So if you don't want to keep hitting the same ones over and over, or if you don't have a paid API key for some of these tools, then that's definitely something that you can enable and disable. And then we talk about use cases, right? We talk about credential exposure discovery, which is going to be something that is very white hat. When people think leaks, they kind of get a little scared a little bit. They're like, hey, this could be potentially unethical if you're looking up people's information in leaks, but that's not necessarily always the case. You're not always looking for a unknown target. In many cases, you're doing credential exposure discovery, making sure that your credentials or your client's credentials or your family's credentials or anything are not exposed online. So that's a very ethical use case. Another thing is threat intelligence, being able to link information like email addresses that are found in malware samples, for example, back to real individuals or getting some trace there. Obviously, that's criminal activity that you're investigating. And by searching it where there may be other criminal activity such as leaks, you might be able to find connections from there as well. There's a variety of other different use cases. I won't cover them all in detail, but we have identity and persona research depending on authorization. Obviously, this could be something that would be really helpful for finding information. I know that when we did missing person cases back when I was working with a lot of nonprofits, leak data would also often give us the lead to be able to find a phone number or email address or IP address or something like that that might be associated to a person that wasn't available in the missing person profile. So that's definitely been helpful as well. But we also talk about corporate security assessments, for example, like looking up email addresses that are linked to a whole list of business emails to be able to see if people are using their business emails to register for personal accounts, things like that. So we kind of conclude this article with OPSEC considerations and additional tips on how you can use the tool. And again, we have a CTF challenge that we have associated with this with this newsletter so that you can put some of the things that we mentioned and actually use the tool leaker to be able to solve a capture the flag event. So definitely go ahead and check that out. That's going to be at osintnewsletter.com/115. We're kind of in the swing of things now with OSINT Tool Tuesday. So I'm trying to get one, essentially the new pattern I'm trying to pull off is one free issue, one OSINT Tool Tuesday, one paid issue, rinse and repeat, so we can have a little bit of everything available in both the podcast as well as the newsletter. So that's it for 115. Again, if you want to follow along /115, I thought this one was really, really helpful. The next one on the list is going to be OSINT newsletter issue number 116. This is when we go into the paid issue of the OSINT newsletter. And this one again is titled Create an OSINT Tool That Constantly Improves. And we'll be covering a variety of different news and tool topics along the way. All right, well, issue number 116, if you want to follow along, is osintnewsletter.com/116. The first news topic that I mentioned in this issue is titled Another 96,477 Private Chats Went Public. This is written on Hank Von Ess's publication called Digital Digging. Essentially, the long and short of it is it's an OPSEC warning or consideration, but also potentially a source of open source intelligence. And what it is that the chats that are on a lot of popular LLMs like Gemini, Grok, Gemini, Copilot, Claude, DeepSeek, ChatGPT, etc. Essentially, you have the ability to share conversations. So if you have like a long chat experience and you want to be able to share that chat with another person who has an interest in a similar line of questions, for example, you could share that with them. But the problem is that they're starting to leak online. So whenever you begin to share a link to that chat, that creates a live URL that anybody can view. It's not, tied to a specific person. So if anybody were to get a hold of that URL, it would then be exposed to the public internet. And so what Hank is writing about, and part of this is a free part of the newsletter, part of it's behind a paywall, but you can get a lot of value from the free section as well. But Grok seems to be the greatest offender in this with 74,000 out of the 96,000 URLs that are in discussion in this particular issue. I know that I recently mentioned or wrote about it being a problem with ChatGPT for a period. I think they had that enabled by default. Maybe it still is, but they were having issues with thousands of those chats being leaked online. It seems like that's flipped over to Grok with Gemini, in the distant lead with 14,000. And so the reason why I mentioned it in the OSINT newsletter is that you can easily search for what would be a link prefix or suffix for a variety of these different AI platforms and see if you can find chats that are public to the internet. Most of the time they're going to be irrelevant, but depending on what other telemetry you have, you might be able to find information that might be exposed, that might be worthwhile for your investigation. But most importantly, because it's probably going to be rare that you're going to just stumble on an open link that's going to be useful for you unless you're just trying to scrape and store them for whatever reason. But the most useful case is for your own operational security. Oftentimes people are using ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini everywhere, including within their sock puppet accounts or their investigative profiles that they have created. But you want to make sure that you do not have that exposed, because some of the questions that you might be asking an LLM for those types of chats could be exposed to the web, and that could be associated back to your identity in some sort of situation. So you want to make sure that you are following your best OPSEC guidance there. So go ahead and check that one out. It's in the OSINT news section. It's titled Another 96,477 quote unquote private chats went public. All right. The next thing that I mentioned in this issue is an article called Identifying the Crypto Entrepreneur Linked to Popular Forum Trading in Leaked Nudes of Women. It's a mouthful of a title, but I think it's something that's worthwhile investigating and looking into and reporting on. So kudos out to Colina or it could be Colina. Apologies if I mispronounce your name, but kudos to you for writing this and publishing it on a publication like Bellingcat. But essentially, what she does is she goes through and looks at all of these different investigative methods to be able to find information about an individual that's associated with some malicious activity online. Being able to go through a variety of these different tools, tactics, and techniques to being able to find things through leaks, for example, which we talked about in the last issue, and being able to go through a variety of different available open source data points to be able to find more information about this crypto entrepreneur and being able to get to the bottom of some of this nefarious activity that's going on online. So it is a long form article, but if you're interested in things like crypto investigations, being able to use OSINT on forums, which we talked about earlier, and using a variety of different tools that you may not be aware of, go ahead and check that one out. It's the second one in the news section of the newsletter, issue 116. Okay. That brings us into the tools section of this issue. There are 3 different tools. They're all on GitHub. So they're all going to be ones that require a little bit of configuration. But the reason why I included all of these on GitHub is along the way, I found a method that's more valuable for me when it comes to discovering new tools or tools that seem to be evading GitHub search engine, but being able to incorporate that discovery mechanism into building your own tool set that may be able to rapidly improve over time with LLM enabled development that we can use for personal OSINT tools. So that's why I included 3 GitHub ones, because it will become relevant later whenever I talk about that section of the newsletter. But the first one on the list is called the OSINT mapping tool. It is a web app for sort of organizing a bunch of information. Think about it as an open source version of Maltego, if you will. There are connector nodes. You can run transforms off of them. You can visualize the information using geo data, for example, layering your data on top of a map. It's actually pretty robust considering it's an open source tool. This is typically something that you get from an enterprise application. There's probably a variety of issues that are going to be going along with using an open source tool. But the good part about this is you can use this tool. You can then contribute back to it if you run into issues. Let's say that you're running it on a Mac device or a Windows device and you find some issues with configuration or setup. You can then use your LLMs to correct the issue, so you can use the tool first, and foremost, but then be able to push that back up to the project to be able to assist with, contributing on the tool itself. But essentially, that's what's really cool about this is you can use this very robust tool. You can set it up with Google Maps. You can use the Google API to be able to get some of the custom, features that come with Google Maps API. Otherwise, you can use things like OpenStreetMap if you want to use something that's a little bit more open source and easier to deal with. But this is definitely something worth checking out, especially if you are finding yourself wanting to visualize a lot of data. Sometimes there's a lot of information that's in spreadsheets, databases, Word docs, PDFs, etc. It's very difficult to present that information sometimes, and it's often very times to collaborate with that type of information. So if you're looking on something that can be a little bit more spatial, a mapping tool, if you will, then check this one out. It's available at GitHub. It's the first one on the list. And that takes us into the second one. And this is where I really started to struggle. I was trying to find new tools that were interesting, that had interesting capabilities, that were things that I wasn't covering in the past. And so oftentimes there are clones of the same tool. They're essentially just doing the same thing with a different ASCII menu or a different type of branding. But every now and then you have a clone of a tool that does everything else another tool does, but it has one additional thing that's interesting. It's like, hey, it has one module that's something I haven't seen before. Those are the types of things I'm looking for, and this is why it's going to be relevant in the conversation that I'm going to have later about building your own tool set. But the second one on the list is called Mail Access. Okay, it's another GitHub tool, and it's an email search tool, right? There's a lot of these that are available. Many of these have gone commercial. They used to be open source available, but now they're either modules inside of paid tools, and they're no longer working in open source version, or they've completely gone commercial. But what this is, it's a self-hosted OSINT platform that allows you to investigate email addresses specifically. So this is very similar to the postal tool that I made a year and some change ago. We're able to investigate and ping across a variety of different APIs, touch different breach data sets, social networks, DNS records, etc., to be able to gather a bunch of information and put it into a single pane of glass. What I really like about this, though, is there's a variety of very advanced features, things like identity graphs, name consensus engine, doing a variety of different risk summary and reports that are being generated from it, having an ever-expanding list of modules, some of them being free, some of them being requiring an API key. And in addition to that, which I think is really awesome, is you can export this stuff to Maltego to be able to investigate it inside of that platform as well. So that's something that's a little bit more robust than what I've seen in tools in the past. Oftentimes you just have a tool that pings a couple different APIs that somebody found. It returns a certain set of results, and that's it. You get something in your CLI, but not often do you get something that gives you an export that can put into another tool that you can expand your investigation further. That actually makes tools like this relevant when you're trying to incorporate them into an already existing enterprise workflow, for example. But the cool part about this is, like, I found this tool. I was searching for new tools on GitHub, and what I typically do is I search for a keyword. I filter by the programming languages I'm the most familiar with. I go most recently updated. I check through ones that I haven't seen before. I see if there's anything interesting. It's very tedious because oftentimes it's repeats of the same stuff or just updates to tools that I'm already familiar with. So instead, what I tried to do is I went through Google and I did a site github.com operator. I searched for the word OSINT in the title of new stuff, and I made it new by only filtering results by the last week. And so what I found was interesting there is that existing tools that I wasn't familiar with weren't showing up, and I was able to find a bunch of other tools instead that were things that I hadn't seen before, Mail Access being one of them. And then the next one, which I'll talk about, is called Search Phone. I also hadn't seen this one either yet. And so I was able to discover them using, no shocker, Google search to be able to find that information. So that is a perfect segue over to this next tool. It's called Search Phone. It's also a GitHub tool. And it's essentially what we're talking about with Mail Access, but for phone numbers. And what I really like about it, has an old school ASCII menu. It has a bunch of different, options that you can use to get started. It prints a lot of the progress of what's going on in the inside of the terminal, so you can have a good, sense of if the tool's working or if it's not. But what I really like about it is that it incorporates a variety of different things that I talk about very often that people don't often incorporate in their tools. It mentions adding SERP API into the phone search, being able to search by a specific phone number or pattern or transform into multiple patterns to search on Google. For example, being able to get multiple searches for free, for example, because SERPAPI.com has a free tier, so you can, if you're not doing a lot of volume, you can easily run it without having to pay any money. But in addition to that, integrating things like GitHub, for example, Num Verify, which is another one that I didn't know that they had a free tier. So being able to do phone number validation, etc. So this isn't like a super unique tool. There's a lot of ones that are out there that are similar. But what I think is really cool about it is that it incorporates SERP API. And in addition to that, everything runs automatically. I mean, the reporting at least happens automatically. It's doing all of this stuff in parallel. It's very efficient, and it's very easy for something to build on top of. So if you're looking for a project to contribute to, this one would be a cool one to contribute to, because you can easily add modules since there's only 3 that are available. But the user interface is really clean. The performance is really good, and it incorporates a lot of valuable APIs. So definitely something worth checking out if you want to expand your bench of phone number tools and potentially have something to contribute to from a development point of view. So that's it for the tools section of the OSINT newsletter. So we covered 2 news topics, 3 different tools. All 3 tools were GitHub tools. Typically we mix in web apps and a variety of other things like browser extensions. But the reason why I did all 3 of these, because it's a perfect segue into what I'm going to talk about, which is the main event of issue number 116, which is creating an OSINT tool that constantly improves. And this is something that sort of happened to me I kind of had an aha moment. I was writing, I was trying to figure out what to write for this particular issue. I was thinking about what I've been writing previously about being able to use LLMs to write tools, to build, to clone tools and be able to fix them and be able to enhance them. But then I started thinking hey, I'll get to this at the very end from the ethical standpoint, but it's hey, what if I built a tool that was sort of like a wrapper, if I was doing a username search tool like Sherlock. And I said, hey, I just want to build a really clean user interface. And then I want to constantly add modules and improve this username search tool until it's the best username search tool on the market, right? Then I started thinking about there's tons of different tools that keep coming out, like Sherlock, updates to Sherlock. There's tons of username searches that come out all the time. And so I started thinking hey, I'm discovering these a lot when I'm searching for new tools for the newsletter. I'm using a variety of different methods. I'm searching on GitHub. I'm searching in search engines. I'm looking on other sites that are promoting different tools that are available. I'm talking to people, asking them what they're using, looking on social media, etc. But I was Every single time I find a username search tool, I have to verify whether or not there's something new or interesting about that tool. Like, hey, this one's pulling images, and then it's taking those images and it's doing a reverse image search on those images to see if it can find a match, for example. I'm like, Sherlock's not doing that. It's not doing facial recognition in any way or grouping profiles by face recognition, which is something you can easily build. I've seen some tools do that. But I was like, hey, every single time I have to look at these and verify if there's a difference between the tools. But then I was like, hey, nowadays I just kind of like clone the repo, and then I ask Claude to say, hey, analyze this tool and give me a report of all the capabilities and compare it to Sherlock, for example, and give me the difference. And it can easily do that. It can scan through the source code. It can say, hey, this one has 2 modules that Sherlock doesn't have, and it has these 2 features that Sherlock also doesn't have. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But then what ends up happening is I'm going to find all these tools. I'm going to stack them up. I'm going to do all this analysis. I'm going to report on them in this newsletter and tell you all these new interesting tools that are worth checking out. But what if you had a tool, let's say that you had a boilerplate, let's say you just cloned Sherlock, improved the UI to make it the way you want to, maybe even make it a web app or something like that. And then you would just scan for these new username tools that would come from GitHub. I also talk about in this issue about browser extensions and being able to pull source code from those, for example. And then you scan to see if there's improvements. You have your LLM take those improvements, implement them into your tool, and then improve your tool accordingly, and then continuously scan and find new tools. Hey, I found a new username search tool. Hey, it has 2 modules that yours doesn't have. I'm going to analyze how they work. I'm going to test them, and then I'm going to add them to your tool. And then, hey, this one has an export format that you don't have. Yours doesn't export in TXT, for example. You did CSV, you did PDF, you did everything, but you missed the TXT export. Boom, now your tool has it because you have your LLM that can analyze this tool, find the gaps, and then be able to apply it to your tool relatively easily. And now in this article, I talk about, taking this to scale. It's like, hey, using GitHub's API, using a SERP API to scan the World Wide Web, looking for browser extensions automatically, finding matches that are similar to your tool, and then just doing this on loop, constantly improving your tool. And I stepped through how I built a pipeline for this to do it myself. I did test it. What I did was I did essentially that. I cloned Sherlock. I made some modifications to the UI so everything would print the way I wanted to. The menu would work the way that I wanted to, etc. I made those changes with Claude. And then I started scanning some of these tools and checking out Magritte, checking out, I think it's called User Scanner, checking out all these big repositories and saying, okay, what's the difference? Adding those in, and it worked incredibly fast with very little token usage because the methods already exist in these tools and you're just applying them to your tools. And so that's what I talk about in this article, step-by-step guide for that. And one thing that I wanted to talk about from an ethical standpoint is that the purpose here isn't to harvest all the source code from every open source project and build this tool that you're trying to sell. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that are going to want to do that. But in general, it's just about having a tool that you can use, similar to what I was talking about before about aggregating, like what Leaker does, all the different leak databases that are out there and putting in a single pane of glass. What you can do is you can build a username search tool that just harvests all these methods, so you don't have to go and try every single one of these tools yourself and be able to juggle through multiple different username search tools. That's a problem in itself, right? Is you're doing an investigation, you find a username, you iterate through tool A, B, C, D, E, or you use some enterprise solution. This will help you avoid doing that. And then in addition, what I mentioned in here is, as you set this thing up to test it, to say, okay, let me use it. Let me see if the information is valuable. Okay, cool, the information's good. Have Claude do the analysis. The tool works, whatever. Here's the diff. Here's how you can improve. But then anything that you find along the way that's something you can fix, you can also send that back up to GitHub and contribute to the project that you're working with as well. But I'm not condoning building an enterprise tool with this method. It's something that you could probably easily do. It's mostly for personal use and being able to be more efficient in your investigations. But yeah, that's a high level, what this is all about. If you're interested in building a tool to be able to continuously improve over time, this is a guide to do that. You don't just have to build a username search tool. I gave a couple different examples here. You could start with mail access, for example, and build out an email search tool. You can start with search phone and build a phone number search tool. You can combine them all together and say, hey, anything that is an email, phone number, or username search tool, any tool that you find, I want you to do this analysis, find new features, incorporate them into my tool. You can do that with pretty much any use case if you want. And so the last bit that I will note on before I close out today is just this concluding rant I have at the bottom, which is what this essentially means. I know that I'm talking about it in this podcast, but what this essentially means with new AI capabilities that are out there, being able to rapidly prototype new software and applications, is that essentially everything that's produced online is just food for the machine, that it can be used, where every single tool that's out there, every single capability is going to have all the same capabilities, because you can harvest this at scale and just bolt it on to any tool that you create. So when you're in this space and you're contributing open source, I feel like that's really what it's becoming, is like you're not actually building open source tools for other people. You're building open source tools for LLMs to consume, to add to other tools. And nowadays when people are developing a lot of these tools, they're not even writing the code themselves anymore. They're using Claude to create the tools for them. So you're using AI to create a tool, which then will be consumed by another AI, which will then be added to an enterprise tool. And eventually you'll be working at an organization, you're looking for a tool, and they all have the same capabilities. So I'm worried about bloating a little bit. I'm worried about the discouraging of open source contribution. I'm worried about the bloating of tool sets in general, and just the overall impact that's going to have on the infrastructure to build all of these things in the long run. So that's something that I kind of mentioned at the end, that I think is something worth considering before we all go out there and build, giant clones of the same tools over and over and over. So definitely give this a read if this is something that's interesting to you. I'm going to go ahead and try this with a few different use cases, not just OSINT related, but just general tools that are very popular out there that I use regularly. I just want to see if I can continuously make a tool that's very solid, and then maybe if it's very useful, I can share it back out and give the attribution to some of the contributions that went into it as I searched around. But that's it for this episode of the OSINT podcast. Again, thanks for listening. Check out our CTFs at ctf.osintnewsletter.com. Also, you can check out our tool set. I talk about tons of tools here. Every time I add them to the newsletter, there's a good chance you're going to find them in the tool database either now or you're going to find them a little bit later. But that's tools.osintnewsletter.com. And lastly, make sure to subscribe and follow us on social media, because you can get videos and you can get additional commentary and other people's opinions about some of the tools, tactics, and techniques that we mentioned here. Especially if a lot of these things sound very abstract to you, we will have a lot of demo videos included in our social media posts that will show you how the tools work live and some of the data and some of the visualizations you can expect. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again in a few weeks.